a lot of Kansas's close losses were games where they were either ahead late and gave it away, or right there late and couldn't quite finish. And that what happened, what transpired last season seems to have reverberated through the coaching staff of a point of emphasis so far this spring.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Paid all who enter and beware this podcast. That's right. This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, here with Kevin Flaherty, as always. And of course, we are brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible. If you have not already subscribed, what are you waiting for? Subscribe on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN, or wherever you get your podcast on audio, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Subscribe. You can leave a comment on our YouTube channel. You can also leave us a 5-star rating and review if you're listening on audio platforms. Huge thank you to everybody that's tuned in on our YouTube channel for some of our live shows. We just did one on Monday night with after the Kansas-Houston basketball game. If you missed that, you can be sure to check that out as well Monday night. And I'm sure we'll be probably going live again on Saturday after KU plays Arizona to wrap up the regular season for the Jayhawks in Allen Fieldhouse on senior night against Arizona. But today, we are going to be talking some football. Long awaited, I'm sure. And we've teased about it. We've talked about it. Spring football is underway for Kansas. We have been out to a handful of practices now. We've gotten to hear from Lance Leipold, strength conditioning coach Matt Gildersleeve, new offensive coordinator Jim Zebrowski as well, a couple players also. So we'll actually have a couple clips here that we're going to play throughout the show today to hear about what they had to say about different things. But I guess first and foremost, Kevin, we've gotten a little bit of a taste.
Yep.
In football at the indoor facility for Kansas. Let's just start, I guess, with just general impressions at this point of what we've seen so far, what you've seen so far of Kansas. Obviously, like I said, we've only gotten to go to 2 spring practices, and Kansas is going to be going for about another 5 weeks here over the course of spring football. So a lot of different storylines to talk about here. What jumps out to you the most just immediately as this thing gets rolling?
Yeah, there's a lot of energy. One of the things that Matt Gildersleeve talked about was as great as the culture was on last year's team and having all that leadership and all those seniors, at times it wasn't as easy to make the case for competition, right? Because you had these guys who had been starters for 2 and 3 years, and not that they weren't in competition, but they felt pretty strongly about where they sat in the program, where their spot was on the depth chart. Guys don't know, Nick. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways now is there are a lot of spots up in the air. And as much as coaches always want to say, hey, every spot is up in the air every year, it's not the easiest thing when a freshman comes in and he's underweight or he's trying to bulk up or whatever, and he sees Devin Neal in front of him. And you know, like, hey, this probably isn't going to be a year where I get a lot of carries. And so just by human nature, right, it's difficult to say, hey, I'm going to be the most prepared guy. I'm going to be ready because my number could be called at any point. I think one of the things that stood out over the couple practices, if you haven't been to a Kansas practice before, and we've been to our share now, Nick, the energy level is really high. They go from drill to drill really quickly. The way that they have things set up, they get players a lot more reps than I think a lot of college teams do. And so I think, I don't want to say I expected them to be haphazard because they haven't been under Leipold, but you figured there'd be a little bit of this guy going the wrong way, right? Or this guy not quite understanding what he's doing. And instead, it seems like everybody is really sharp. Everybody is honed in and focused. And I think one of the parts about that is probably that competition element. You can't take a day off. You can't take plays off because the guy who's right next to you, he's not even the guy behind you because you don't know, if you're ahead or if he's ahead or whatever. And that's going to be a big part of this spring is figuring that out. You can't operate like you're the guy when nothing has been decided at this point.
Lance Leipold is certainly a master of efficiency.
Yeah,
you mentioned it. When you go to practices, it is boom, boom, boom. I mean, it is very, very efficient. They've really mastered that. Lance Leipold has spoke about it. Other coaches have spoken about the way Lance Leipold runs practices, how there's not really a wasted second. It's pretty much 4 or 5 minutes on the clock, station to station. You're moving and doing exactly so on and so forth. No real wasted time during practices. And you mentioned Matt Gildersleeve as well. And for those that maybe don't know, Matt Gildersleeve is an incredible individual. He is probably really like the pistons that fire the whole engine of the program, I think, in some cases, with what he does in terms of putting together strength and conditioning for the players and keeping guys in strength, keeping guys in shape and building them up. He is an incredible individual. And on top of that, he is the most energetic person I think maybe I've ever met. He's always fired up. He's always excited. He always seems to have an extra pep in his step. And he is somebody that if you are maybe just from the outside, you probably wouldn't specifically recognize him or really know exactly what he does. But I can assure you that man does a lot for the program for sure.
Yeah, his energy level is so contagious. And I thought one of the things that was really interesting when we talked to him, he was talking about kind of how you cater your workout plans, right? In terms of a lot of times the younger guys are maybe on one plan because they're still developing, from a strength and conditioning standpoint. They aren't as beaten up because they haven't been playing college football, et cetera. Whereas you have maybe some older guys that maybe this guy's had a knee injury, maybe this guy's had a shoulder. And so you kind of cater the plans a little bit differently for how they are. And he talked about certain guys that have really specific individual plans, to really maximize who they are. But I thought one of the fun things about it, Nick, was when he said basically, we have to mix and match all this stuff with all the new guys. Maybe a guy isn't quite like at the level of an older player in terms of the strength and conditioning where he came in at, but maybe because he has played college football, he does have a few nicks. And so for a lot of people, I think they would view it as a challenge in a negative respect. To your point on Coach Gildersleeve, one of the things that I think pops with him is he gets excited for that stuff. Like that's the stuff that gets him, hopping out of bed in the morning, is the fact that, oh my gosh, like I have to design all these extra workout plans, for people in all walks of life. And so he really is, like, if you were to ask somebody within the program and say, okay, like, these coaches are good or whatever else, who's kind of the silent heartbeat or who's the person that kind of really makes this thing go that not enough people talk about, I think Gildersleeve probably gets circled there quite a bit.
Looking back to last season, one of the big storylines for Kansas over the course of the season was a lack of finishing at times, maybe even a lack of discipline, right? You think about a lot of Kansas's close losses were games where they were either ahead late and gave it away or right there late and couldn't quite finish. And that, what transpired last season seems to have reverberated through the coaching staff of a point of emphasis so far this spring, even early on. I mean, just immediately, that was some of the first couple things that Lance Leipold and Coach Gildersleeve said as well, was about changing that, right? Focusing on finishing, going all out and completing still at 100% because of what happened last year, right? So I think you can almost look at that as obviously, unfortunately, the way the season went was not how Kansas hoped it would go. But I think if you project forward into this season, that could be the learning experience that maybe this staff needed to implement some things that they feel like they can do to now improve Kansas into where the Jayhawks will be able to perform well late in games and execute late. And this is where I want to get to a clip of what Coach Gildersleeve was talking about. So this is a clip here. He's talking about this idea of perfect discipline. That was a term that he used basically to describe how he wants to get the team to be able to execute with discipline in late game situations and things like that. So here's a little bit of what he shared with us about what perfect discipline looks like.
I'll call someone into the middle of the circle that we'll get, these lines that we'll get into, and I'll give them the task and them only. they have to communicate that to the rest of the team. So one could be perfect jumping jacks, where these two sides of the lines have to do a jumping jack on the even numbers, and these two sides of the lines have to do it on the odd numbers. And then these guys only count the odds, and these guys only count the evens. But I only tell one guy that. And then he's got to get into the circle, and he's got to tell the entire team that. And we might have crowd noise playing, and we might have the lights going on and off, and they've got to get those distractions, and they've got to be able to communicate to their teammates, and they've got to execute.
So that was just a little bit of one example of what he was referencing there. And basically this idea of, okay, you've got to be able to work together on the field in a situation with pressure on. He went on to describe a situation where they will put time on the clock, 1:37, and every time somebody messes up, the clock stops and it's a lost down or incompletion, and they have to keep going and to try to complete the task before the clock hits zero. So that to me was really, I thought, telling that was a real significant point of emphasis for the staff coming into this spring, of understanding and recognizing this was an area where the team fell short last year in 2024, and really was one of the major reasons why Kansas finished with the record they had. I mean, they played in a number of one-score games that didn't go their way, and that seems to be something that they've really decided to hone in on and try to execute at a high level and get the team prepared to be able to focus in situations like that late in games.
I'm glad that it was a team-wide focus, because like we talked about on the show, I feel like people want to put blame on one or two people, right? Like, oh, it's Jeff Grimes. Oh, Jalen's not playing well because he's rusty, and they want to make it one or two things. And that's the great explanation for everything that went wrong. And I think that was the tough thing about last year's team, Nick. And like I said, we did talk about it on the show, but it wasn't always the same thing. It was a veteran guy missing a block in a key situation. It was the defense, being put in a good situation and giving up drives late in the game, like Arizona State, where you have a lead. Kansas's offense took the lead twice in the fourth quarter against Arizona State and immediately let in, go ahead drives for Arizona State. West Virginia, you're up 11, and people didn't love the play calling there, obviously, but also if you're up 11 in the fourth quarter, your defense should probably be able to hold that one down. And I'm not putting it on the defense. I'm saying it was all these different groups and all of these different things going wrong. And so when you looked at it in the moment, that was part of the reason I thought it was going to be so tough for Kansas to find its way out of that, right? When all that was happening, it wasn't one thing where it's, hey, let's replace this wide receiver and we'll call it good. There were a lot of different things going wrong. And I think that while this year's team won't have the level of experience, culture will be a building thing. It's not necessarily as established with this group, and it was something that Jim Zabrowski talked about, them trying to sort of facilitate and build that familial bond with this group. But I think the other thing is you want to be really good in those situations and be able to close out games. You want to be able to, when you go into Manhattan and you have a lead and you have the ball, to be able to close that thing out. And that didn't happen enough last year. And Nick, as you know, and maybe that provides a little seg there, the K-State game in particular, I think is one that's kind of been circled by this staff as a, don't forget this thing was right there and we didn't finish. There wasn't perfect discipline down the stretch.
Yeah, we heard from DJ Withers, who said that they put the K-State game on their video board basically during practices as a reminder of what could have been last season or how things played out in that specific game. So absolutely, that seems to be, to me, that was maybe the number one thing that I kind of took away from Lance Leipold, from Coach Matt Gildersleeve, even from Jim Zabrowski a little bit, is that aspect of we have to be better in these situational moments. And it's somewhere that Kansas struggled in last season and led to their 5-7 record. And there's been a pretty significant emphasis, I would say, on trying to change that early in spring. Now, obviously, you've got many months to work on that and get yourselves in position, but it's clear that's they're starting it now, which is something that's noteworthy. Speaking of that, and more of about specifically that maybe look at different position groups for Kansas. We'll take a quick break, and then we'll come back, dive into a couple things. Lance Leipold had said something interesting about the quarterbacks. Matt Gildersleeve talked about some wide receivers as well. We're going to get into all that and more coming up in just a few minutes. But that gives us a chance to remind you about Home Field Apparel. You can shop Home Field Apparel at homefieldapparel.com. You can use the promo code PAY24 for 15% off your first order. We talked about they've got some great gear for football season. You're going to be out supporting the Jayhawks at Open Ballpark. Crank the Hog, by the way. You can get out there and use some great Kansas gear there. And, of course, you can shop many other schools as well. If you've got somebody, friend, family member that's a fan of another school, you can get them some sweet swag from homefieldapparel.com. And, again, use that promo code PAY24, 15% off your first order. We're going to talk more Kansas football coming up next.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
Success in real estate takes more than vision. It takes the right financial partner. When someone takes something rundown and turns it into something great, that's called a comeback story. Like Bryan Group. They take distressed properties here in KC, completely rework them, and then turn them into valuable real estate. But that kind of work needs the right bank behind it. Enter Emprise Bank. They're not about cookie-cutter loans. They saw Bryan Group's vision, backed them, and now they're making big moves in Kansas City real estate. Talk about your partner impossible. Emprise doesn't do one-size-fits-all financing. They invest in potential and back growth. Visit emprisebank.com/KC to learn more. Emprise Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer with Kevin Flaherty. One of the other major storylines, I think, of this team, among many, is when you look at the offense, talk about the wide receivers, the new wide receivers that Kansas has. KU loses to the top three receivers, and you look around at the returners, and it's Doug Amelia and Keaton Kubeka. So Kansas naturally got busy on the transfer portal, brought in a couple of different guys with different skill sets as well. Another aspect of that is going to be interesting this spring, and something that I'm curious for your take on, Kevin, is Jalen Daniels unfortunately underwent a minor procedure we learned about a couple weeks ago. That's going to limit him for a majority of the spring, it seems like. Jim Zabrowski mentioned today on Tuesday that basically he's getting better every day, and could potentially, get going towards the end of spring, but it seems like at least my interpretation of it was it's still going to be a little bit, basically.
Yeah.
So when you think about that and the fact that Kansas is basically reloaded at the wide receiver position, does that give you any concern, I guess, at this point of, hey, you brought in a bunch of new transfers and your starting quarterback is not going to be able to really work out with them that much this spring?
It doesn't bother me as much just because I think last year we did see Jalen kind of struggle to connect with the wide receivers after getting healthy. But he was on the shelf for a lot longer, and they were really, really trying to make sure, hey, whatever happens when that game against Lindenwood kicks off, we want Jalen Daniels at 100% health. And maybe, hindsight is 2020. Like, maybe do you scale it back a little bit and the rust doesn't take quite as long to. The biggest thing was him being healthy. I don't think that's a risk here, Nick. I don't think it's a similar deal. It doesn't sound like a back deal, because backs can be, such a touch and go thing where you're feeling good one day and then you're back in traction, a day or two later. But I also think, it wouldn't be, I think there's a chance he returns this spring, like they've said. But even beyond that, I think that it sounds like he's going to be in a good position to go through the offseason. And so you're going to have the 7-on-7 work that you do over the offseason and all of the things that you do to get ready. And then you're going to also have all of fall camp, and I think that was another part of the Daniels situation that maybe was a little bit, I don't want to say slept on, but the fact that it wasn't like he was throwing all kinds of extra reps in fall camp to try and make up for it. I expect, Jalen probably to be pretty, and I'll knock on wood, to probably be pretty good to go for fall camp and likely well before then. And so I do think there's plenty of chances for him to go ahead and shake off any rust that comes with an injury, get back to full health, and build those relationships with the receivers. Don't forget, Canty is a guy I know both of us liked as a transfer. He's a guy that's coming in. I know a lot of people thought Jaden Nickens was somebody that could potentially find his way into the rotation as a freshman. He's not getting in until the summer. And so there are going to be some newcomers then too, but I actually look at it as a little bit of a benefit because you can slide so many of those reps towards Cole Ballard, toward Isaiah Marshall, and to a lesser extent, even getting some reps, toward David McComb in a way that maybe you might not have been able to if Jalen was healthy.
And speaking of that, Lance Leipold shared his own thoughts about what you just mentioned there about rotating different quarterbacks with Jalen Daniels being limited in the spring. Here's a little bit of what he had to say about the quarterback situation.
It gives everybody more reps to go. I thought Cole had a really good night. Again, Zeke keeps showing improvement. Again, they'll make the most of it. The comfort in the offense by those guys, it'll show a lot. Not exactly sure how much and when Jalen will be able to do stuff. I mean, won't be anything before spring break. But, all those guys. And then, between Mikey and TJ and then David McComb getting his first chance, for any of those new guys, especially at quarterback, this goes extremely fast in the pace of practice. But it'll be good.
Quick little note also, you mentioned Bryson Canty. If you're wondering about him being a transfer, not being on campus yet, it has to do with Columbia, Ivy League, where he's coming from. I think he's literally finishing his degree, I believe,
yes,
this spring before he gets to KU. So smart guy, obviously, if he's at Columbia.
I think he should probably be able to pick up the offense.
Yeah. But you heard a little bit from Lance Leipold about Jalen Daniels and where he could be at this spring. Again, seems like we're looking at probably at least a couple weeks before he might be able to do anything, which, again, does open up the opportunity for Isaiah Marshall, for Cole Ballard to step up and get some more reps. And listen, Cole Ballard continues to be very impressive to me with what he's done and in the situation that he was thrust into as a freshman when you consider being a walk-on and starting against K-State. And then getting to where he is now. And then, of course, Isaiah Marshall, who is a guy that I know so many fans are excited about and look forward to hopefully him taking the next step and progressing. I would just say this about Isaiah Marshall, like just let him go at his own pace, right? I don't think you need to put too much pressure expectation on him right away. Like you have Jalen Daniels, obviously, for this season as your quarterback. And so that's going to give Isaiah Marshall even more time to soak everything in and really hopefully continue to progress. And, you look around college football, Kevin, and some guys, it's when you throw them in as freshmen, it doesn't always pan out, right? Sometimes it's better off if you do have a season or two. And I know in this era of the transfer portal and NIL, people always panic when you have players that are highly recruited or, players that programs are excited about, but they don't get on the field right away. They might end up transferring out, right? I don't think that's really an issue at all with Isaiah Marshall. So definitely not be concerned about that, I would say.
Yeah, I don't think Isaiah Marshall is that type of kid. For one, I think that that he was going to see that opportunity to compete for the starting jobs coming up relatively quickly, and so he wasn't going to leave before that opportunity was there. But I think even beyond that, Nick, we've talked about it on this show, but this is a staff that's so relationship based, and I think that one of the reasons they don't get hit hard by the transfer portal, while some other teams you see teams that have giant recruiting budgets and all of these things, and they get rated in the transfer portal, even though theoretically they should have the money to pay out NIL, all those different things. I think that staff does an amazing job of having those conversations with players. They might not always be the most comfortable discussions in terms of, hey, here's where you sit, but they're always honest with them. And so players always know exactly kind of where they stand, what's coming down the pike. And so there aren't really surprises like you would expect them to be. And so I'm sure when it came time to say, hey, Jalen's got another year, we really want him back, that didn't come as a surprise to Isaiah Marshall. That was probably something that they had talked with him about, like, hey, we think you've got a chance to be a really good quarterback here at Kansas. We think the best thing for us is to have Jalen come back for another year. We're going to go ahead and sort of talk with him about doing that. And I think they put their cards on the table. And so credit to Isaiah Marshall for being the type of guy to stick it out. He's a very mentally tough kid, which is part of the reason that he won, Michigan Mr. Football or whatever he did, and leading his program to a state title. The mental toughness is a big part of it, and credit to the Kansas staff for, communicating well with all the players through the program, just sort of, hey, this is what's in front of you right now.
Yeah. I mean, Lance Leipold and the staff, you mentioned it, are very, I think, forthcoming and upfront about what they expect and how nothing is given, things are earned, right? And that's whether you're a freshman, whether you're a big time transfer coming in, all of the above, right? Everybody starts sort of at that same level playing field, so to speak. So, all that stuff has to be earned. And that then you look at the wide receiver position. I think that's a great example where KU has brought in some transfers there, but those guys are going to have to earn it, right? Like those guys are going to have to prove it over the course of spring into the summer and fall camp as well. Because, you look at Doug Amelia and Keaton Kubeka, they're going to be on the same starting playing field as Cameron Pickett, as Emmanuel Henderson, so on and so forth. And for these transfers, in some cases, the first time that the staff gets to really look at them. I think I don't know that people fully really comprehend just how quickly the transfer portal moves. And Coach Jim Zabrowski talked about this a little bit, actually, where it's not like high school where you get 6 months or 8 months to evaluate a player and define and decide what you want to do. It may be a matter of days or even hours in some cases of, hey, is this guy a target or is he not? Because if you wait too long and 6 or 7 other schools jump on him, well, then even if you maybe decide later on you did want to go after him, it's too late, right? It's too late. So for a lot of guys in the transfer portal, this is, I think, the staff's first time really get a really good look at them. And Coach Matt Gildersleeve, the strength and conditioning coach, had a chance to speak about what he's seen from some of the receivers. Here's a little bit of what he had to say.
Emmanuel is going to be very, very special, and I think that's as much of his process of how he goes about it. But physically, he's one that caught my eye, day one. Cam Pickett's a guy that comes in and just had a great foundation of training. So he was a guy that got to hit the ground running very, very early. Which obviously, receiver being a high need, those two guys being in that position early on was very, very good. But I'm happy with all of them. They've all progressed significantly, but they're all in different places based off of where they came here.
And that last part that he's talking about is something we mentioned. They're guys come in at different spots, and it's kind of up to the staff to try to get them all back to the same playing field, right, when it comes to strength and conditioning and so on and so forth. But yeah, Emmanuel Henderson, I think, is a guy that even in just the very, very brief amount of time that we've got to see him in person, and also in the brief amount of time we've had to ask Coach Lance Leipold and Jim Zabrowski about those guys, Henderson seems to be a guy that I think the staff is pretty pleased with at this point. Obviously, it's very early, but transfer from Alabama, he seems like a guy that may be someone to keep an eye on going forward.
Yeah, really athletic guy, was, of course, like a top 50-ish, I think, prospect out of high school, was the number 2 running back, actually, out of high school. And so when you look at that, you would expect the run after catch ability, things like that to be pretty there. But to Gildersleeve's point, and I know you've watched the receivers some too, Nick, it's been impressive to see the way that he goes about each rep and the way that he approaches it. You can tell this is a guy that's been coached by Nick Saban, right? In terms of the way that he attacks each one. That wide receiver position is so fascinating because when you come out and it's the first day of practice and guys are going through drills and stuff, you always have the old guys like leading reps, right? They're the first guy out. It's, whether it's, hey, you're stepping over bags as a linebacker, Jason Gilliam today was the first linebacker going across the bags. Obviously a guy who's spent a lot of time at Kansas, has been through a lot of practices at Kansas, has seen quite a bit of field time at Kansas. For the wide receivers, that's Keaton Kubeka. Keaton Kubeka was the guy leading in those drills. And so going through with Keaton not even being a guy that's really, been out there, been tested, all of those different things, it really is sort of an open door to opportunity for all of those guys. And it's going to be one of those things that I think each of the players is going to be able to look back that first game when they say, hey, I got 60 snaps today, or hey, I got 20 snaps today. They're probably going to be able to point to, what happens over these next 3 or 4 months is the biggest reason why.
Let's get into a couple more of our takeaways coming up after this other second quick break, and we'll be right back to wrap up some of our other takeaways from the start of K-football spring practice.
We appreciate you supporting KC Sports Network by listening to our podcast. You have helped us become the highest-ranked Chiefs podcast network in 2022 and 2023. And don't forget about our daily Substack newsletter, the best written analysis you can find on the Chiefs straight to your inbox every day. kcsn.substack.com.
If you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? You should have already done that at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN on YouTube for our YouTube channel. And of course, you can find us KCSN on any audio platform, whether that's Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe, connect with the show, follow us on social media at Payheat KCSN on Twitter for more clips and photos of different things at spring practices and more. You can also follow Kevin at K Flaherty KCSN and myself at NickSpringer29. So lots of ways to get involved and talk on the show. A really good conversation there about the quarterback and wide receiver positions going into the spring at this point for Kansas. When you kind of look around the rest of the position groups here for KU on offense specifically, a lot of the same questions are involved at the tight end position, I think, that are at the wide receiver position. When you think about bringing in Keon Burnett, who was actually KU's highest rated transfer, if you look at 24/7 Sports.
I think Kamara is now. I think they bumped
Kamara
up. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Bengali Kamara, the transfer linebacker from South Carolina. You have Deshaun Haneke coming back, which it was great it's great to see him just back on the field, I think, after the injury that he suffered in fall camp to his Achilles last year. You look at the running back position, something that I think may have maybe gone under the radar a little bit was the return of Daniel Highshop. People that maybe follow the program maybe have remembered it was before the bowl game, I believe, or I guess they didn't play a bowl game. Sorry, before, like right at the end of the season, before as things were progressing, it was Daniel Highshaw was away from the team at one point, and it appeared as though he was indeed probably going to be transferring out of the program. Basically, what ended up happening is, correct me if I'm wrong here, Kevin. I mean, Savion Morrison ends up deciding to leave the program, and I think that was maybe part of the reason why Daniel Highshaw comes back. But Kansas does still go and add LaShawn Williams, a transfer from Iowa, into the backfield. So they have Daniel Highshaw back. He is out there. He is a part of this team. So you would expect to be sort of the lead back coming into this season. But again, that's another room where there's going to be a lot of competition for carries.
Yeah, Harry Stewart, too. This is a guy that we said last spring, does not look like a true freshman. Well, you can take that forward a notch and say that Harry Stewart still does not look like a redshirt freshman either. Very physically developed. Obviously, Johnny Thompson's been in the program for a while. The freshmen, I believe, are not in yet, but they did well at that position in this recruiting class. So that running back room looks really, really good. And one of the things that I really have found interesting is the way that both Zabrowski and then at Football Media Day heading into the spring, Matt Lubick, how they talked about basically kind of what they wanted to be as an offense. And if you watch the bowl game, there wasn't really as much option, but there was a lot of vertical throwing that they had for Jason Bean. He lit up the sky, threw for a ton of yards and everything else. Lubick is a guy that, I think has those option things. And when you look at what they did at Nevada, it's really easy to watch what they run and imagine it with Jalen Daniels because the quarterback run game, not just the option, but quarterback power, quarterback draw, the different ways that they were able to use him there. But let's be clear here, like Kansas is still going to want to run wide zone. They're still going to want to be able to line up and run the ball on people. And even beyond that, Nick, I think the offensive line, not that it has a ton of questions because you do bring back, two starters and then a third guy in Calvin Clements that started the season finale, started the bowl game a year ago. So was in the rotation. You're very familiar with him. Nolan Gorsk is a guy that's played, here and there as well. But I do think they're maybe a little bit unproven from a pass protection standpoint, and what you're going to see when you're lining up against Missouri and the defensive ends that Missouri has and the way that they're going to try and get after you, how those guys are going to hold up. I think this is an offensive line that, to me at least, from an outsider's perspective, looks like it could be a really good one at running the ball. And so as much as, it's great to hear about Emmanuel Henderson, I think the tight end room they're really excited about because they have guys that can really get down the field and stretch the field vertically. But at the same time, I still think that this is a team that is going to want to get the ball to Daniel Highshaw. They're going to want to utilize Jalen Daniels' legs. And so having that deep running back room and a room that's pretty deep with talent too, not just depth in terms of numbers, but depth in terms of quality, I think is maybe one of the most positive indicators for this offense, maybe right behind returning your starting quarterback in Jalen Daniels.
Yeah, the biggest question on the offensive line to me is I think it's safe to assume Calvin Clements is going to be probably left tackle, but your other tackle is up in the air, I would say, at this point. I think that's probably still a discussion that's being had at this stage of the spring. We haven't had a chance to hear from DK McDonald yet. I think we're going to be hearing from him later on in the week, which I am very excited about. A new defensive coordinator stepping up after Brian Borland stepped down. But just real quick, you look at the defense. Last year, Kevin, you were bullish on the interior of the defensive line. I'm assuming that's the same again this year, considering
weakness.
Yeah. Considering DJ Withers and Tommy Dunn are both back again, and you add Gage Keys as well. Blake Harold is a guy that has received a lot of praise going back to last year as well. You look at the outsides, you've got Dean Miller back, who has switched numbers. He is now wearing number 5, by the way. And he looks like he's also maybe taken a step forward in his physical development, which is good to see as well. You think about Justice Finkley, the transfer from Texas that they added on the other. That could be.
Have you stood next to Justice yet? By the way,
I have not, and quite frankly, I don't know if I want to. Because
he is an absolute fire hydrant. I mean that guy absolutely. When you think about a strong side defensive end and somebody that is going to be very difficult to move in the run game and set the edge on, I happen to be on the far side of practice today, and they were running some pursuit drill stuff over there. And so got to have Justice Finkley, kind of flash by my face and saw my life flash before my eyes, as he did it. And so good looking guy. I would say too, Nick, the young defensive ends, I think are looking pretty good. I was impressed with Caleb Redd, just watching him run around and move. He's got some good length out there. Definitely looks the part. I thought Dak Brankley looked really good physically. Job always looks good physically in terms of what he brings. And Nick, you brought up Deshaun Hanukkah. Dylan Brooks is another one of those guys that it kind of warms my heart to see him out there running around and being back on the football field after his injuries too.
Yeah, DJ Warner transferred out, so I think you start to look at Job to take a step forward, as you mentioned. Dak Brinkley is a guy that I'm intrigued by, certainly, to see if he can get on the field much this year as well. But yeah, it feels like that defensive end room, even if you do take out DJ Warner, who is obviously one of the highest rated guys Kansas brought in, it still feels like there's a ton of talent there that Kansas can tap into this season and going forward.
We didn't even mention Adrian Hawley, who enrolled early and was a 4-star defensive end. And Nick, like he's one of those people that people walk by and they're like, that's what they look like, in terms of the 4-star rating is well earned from a physical standpoint. I don't think Kansas is going to need Adrian Hawley to play big reps right away. They have enough other guys, I think, but it's interesting because you have it, and I'm sure you're going to get there. You have all of these guys in the front and a ton of experience on the interior little less experience at the end spot, but a lot of talent, a lot of depth there. And then you have a lot of newness on the back seven part of that. And I think that's going to be maybe, if we're asking, hey, what are you watching for this spring? I think the wide receivers is one part of it. I think the other part, looking on the other side, is you want to see how that group all comes together.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about new starters at virtually every position in the linebacking core and in the secondary, right? I mean, you look at linebackers, you got Trey Lathan, Joseph Sipp, Bengali Kamara, who you mentioned earlier. Those three guys.
Kamara looks smart, by the way, too. Like he really does.
You do have Jason Gilliam as well. And then you look in the secondary, you've got Lyric Rawls, you've got Jalen Todd, who is probably going to be stepping into a larger starting role as well. You've got Jalil Hurley, the transfer from Alabama. You've got DJ Graham, transfer from Utah State. You're talking about, again, basically 6 positions probably that are going to have guys starting starting, I guess, really in a sense of like, maybe they played some last season, but really fully starting this year, right? So that does leave a lot of questions. And DK McDonald is a guy that I'm really excited to hear from because of the fact that he's now defensive coordinator, but DK McDonald is also dealing with safeties in the secondary. So he's going to have certainly, you would think, a lot to say and a lot of voice in that room about how those guys are going to be deployed. And, you think about OJ Burrows and obviously the 2 all Big 12 corners in Kobe Bryant and Melo Dotson, 2 guys that you hope are day 2 draft picks, maybe even earlier potentially for Kansas. Those guys are all gone, right? So there's going to have to be somebody, I think, in that back end that steps up as a leader going forward. And maybe that's Lyric Rawls. Maybe it's one of the Dye brothers.
Maybe it's Taylor Davis.
Yeah,
guy as well. Yeah, there are definitely guys there. It's just I don't know how it shakes out, Nick. Like I really don't. If you're asking me, hey, handicap this safeties race, or or you lose your house, I would be a very nervous person right now because I think that there are a lot of ways they can go, and at the media day part of it, when I talked to DK McDonald about it, one of the things that he had said was the variety of safeties that they have, because you have a lot of different kinds of athletes and body types, also maybe allows them to mix and match with some things in terms of, hey, this is a situation where maybe we want Mason Ellis out there. This is a situation where maybe the better pick is Taylor Davis or LaShawn Robinson or any of those, not LaShawn Robinson, sorry, the Auburn transfer. So yeah, I mean, it's I think when you look at that group in particular, there are a lot of different ways that they could go. And so that's one of the positions that I think even more than corner, linebacker, you've got guys who have played a lot of football, just not a lot of football at Kansas. But that safety spot is maybe the most intriguing position on the entire football team to me.
And the beauty of it right now is, I don't know is an acceptable answer, to be honest. I mean, we're talking first week of March here, right? So you've got plenty of time to really dissect what you want to do if you're DK McDonald and working with that secondary and working with the back half of the defense about who you think might be the best fit and how you think that might be going forward. Now, if we're having this conversation in the second week of August, I think at that point you're feeling more unsettled about things, about the status of that secondary. But for now, yeah, this is what spring football is about, right? A chance to bring these guys together, get them together, and figure out sort of what you have and where you want to plug in guys and how you think you want to move forward. That's kind of what spring football is all about in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was maybe the thing that Zabrowski said today that kind of stood out most to me, was because he was asked basically how much of this is install. And he was like, well, a decent sized portion of it is install, but a lot of it's figuring out what you have, in terms of who you can count on, what they can do, what they do well, because they aren't just going to, it's not like a video game where, your receiver gets a 95 rating and that just means he's good at everything, right? There's typically things that he's better at, than other things. And so if you have a wide receiver, it's like, hey, this this guy's not great running post routes, but he's really nails at, at dig routes, then that's something that you're finding out this spring is maybe we need to work on post routes more. Maybe we need to make sure that he's running more of this type of route and less of this type of route. What kind of concepts do our quarterbacks really enjoy running? And I'm interested too. Zabrowski's such a creative guy, and I think Lubick is too, and they're both really fun. Would it surprise you, Nick? I mean, we saw some formations a couple years ago where you had Jalen Daniels and Jason Bean on the field at the same time, and you were running motion and, having both quarterbacks out there. Would it really surprise you to see Isaiah Marshall get a little bit of a package out there with the kind of gospel he is? And so that's stuff that's really fun to think about. It's also a ways down the line from where they're at right now, where they're trying to decide, sort of where their next meal is coming from, so to speak.
Jim Zabrowski has such a unique mind in that he's like a pinball machine. It's just the ball is just going all over the place, constantly bouncing new ideas, new thought process, all kinds of stuff off of whatever. And I think that's exciting. He's definitely going to be. I think the Kansas offense is certainly going to look a little bit different this year as well. And I'm excited to see what he, along with Matt Lubick, can do to sort of to get things going there. And same thing on the defensive side with DK McDonald. I think there's a lot of interesting things that Kansas can do going forward with new coaching personnel and new player personnel that they need to iron out now and into the summer and into fall camp as well. But again, that's the biggest thing is plenty of time as we're just a few practices into spring. With that being said, over the course of the next basically 5 weeks, we're going to be having a chance to hear from all those different coaches, and we'll be able to bring some of that to you via the show, via our social media channels as well. Once again, you can follow at PayHateKCSN for some great content from practices, tons of pictures from Kevin and myself and video and so on and so forth. So very excited time.
Hunter videos from Nick out of pictures from
Hunters.
Or could you want in your life?
I'm so glad you said that because special teams, punters are people too. And also Lath Margin looking pretty good as well. I watched him. And hey, I actually spent more time than I probably should have watching the long snappers. Long snappers looking good. It was a good workout.
Awesome.
That's important though. That stuff is important. Special teams is important. But yeah, punters are people too. Graydon Addison was getting some reps in. Of course, no more Damon Greaves. He transferred out. But yeah, punters are people too. So, you know what? I'm sure he was appreciative of that. He's like, man, this is great. This guy's filming me practicing punts. This never happens. You know what? That's important. That's important, hard-hitting stuff right there.
It was his red carpet moment. And
exactly.
And exactly. It got him mentioned on the show in a better way than me forgetting Laquan Robinson's first name. By the way, all these shared last names are going to kill me, especially if there's a situation where you've got Bengali Kamara and John Kamara on the field at the same time. That's going to be a little bit of a rough deal. They're both kind of tall, rangy guys. Both of them have single digit numbers, both named Kamara. Like there's some danger out there for us.
Yeah. You mentioned also we're at the time period where guys have changed numbers, and there's been a number of those. Mentioned Dean Miller. He changed. Keaton Kubeka changed. I think he was 13. Now he's 3.
By Job, number 22.
By Job. Yeah. By Job changed to 22. I'm trying to think if there's any other like real noteworthy ones that I noticed right away. But yeah, so guys with new numbers transferring in, of course, as well. If you see a stocky running back wearing number 4 taking reps, it's not Devin Neal, LaShawn Williams. I saw some people mention that, but yeah, LaShawn Williams wearing number 4 in the running back room now for KU as well. So yeah, it's an exciting time. Looking forward to it and looking forward to talking about it and bringing some great content to you as well here on the show and on our social media channels and platform and so on and so forth. So, but Kevin, you got anything else before we wrap things up here on our first spring football show of 2025?
No, let's do it again. You those of you who know me know that I'm nuts for not just for football, but for off-season football talk. So it was it's been great to be able to go to practice to see them run around a little bit. We haven't seen them in full pads yet. That should be coming at least a little bit later. But hey, football is here. Spring has sprung, Nick.
Yep, spring has sprung on the eve of a winter storm in March. As we record this on Tuesday afternoon, spring indeed has sprung because spring football is here. But that's going to wrap things up here on the show today. Once again, thanks so much for joining us, taking some time to support the show. If you haven't already, subscribe on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN, and also wherever you get your audio as well. You can subscribe there to stay up to date on all things happening over the course of this spring. We are going to continue to be talking KU basketball as well as far as they go into the postseason. They wrap up the regular season coming up on Saturday against Arizona, so you can be on the lookout for more on that as well. There's plenty more here on the channel. Busy time. So until then, he is Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer, and we'll talk to you again soon. See ya.